I'm Andrew Feingold, and I'm one of the co-conveners of the Mesoamerican Worldview and Intellectual Tradition Working Group at UIC's Institute for the Humanities. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our speaker today, Dr. James Maffie. Dr. Maffie received his PhD in philosophy from the University of Michigan in 1988. Formerly an associate professor at Colorado State University, he is now senior lecturer in the Department of History at the University of Maryland, where he also holds affiliations with the departments of philosophy, Latin American studies, and religious studies. In addition to dozens of academic articles and book chapters, he is the author of an important monograph titled Aztec Philosophy: Understanding a World in Motion, published by the University Press of Colorado in 2014. This dense but accessible work weaves together evidence from a variety of sources to articulate some of the underlying propositions of an Aztec metaphysics, including the monadic nature of reality, which is identical with and unified by the divine substance Teot, and the process-based nature of this reality, which entails the constant unfolding or coming into being of Teot. Dr. Maffie is now building off of this description of a coherent Aztec worldview in two further book manuscripts. One is titled The Tonalamat as Talking Book, Conversations with Other Than Human Persons in the Key of Life. And the other is titled Aztec Philosophy of Life, Weaving a Life World in Motion. The latter of these in particular appears to be about the lived implications of the Aztec worldview, something that approaches what Western philosophers have categorized under ethics or investigated under the rubric of the good life. Undoubtedly, the talk you will be presenting today, which is titled The Role of Hardship, Ihiyohuiliztli, in Mexica ethics, or Why Being Good Has to Hurt, will give us a glimpse into this work in progress. Please join me in welcoming James Maffie.
Thank you for that wonderful, generous introduction, Andrew. I forgot to put the Nahuatl in there in this title. I'm pleased to meet you all, most of whom I've never met, but it's nice to be able to talk with you, if only virtually. So today I want to talk about, as Andrew said, the role of hardship in Mexica ethics, or why being good has to hurt. Those of you who know the codices, the image here is from the Codex Loud. And it sort of captures this idea of the inevitability, the inescapability of hardship in Mexica ethics. So I'll carry on. So I got onto this topic, as Andrew said, I'm looking at Mexica ethics or philosophy of life, sort of very, very broadly construed. And I came across this passage in the Ihiyohuiliztli in the Florentine Codex. And it caught my eye. And it goes, "Hear well, O my daughter, O my child. The earth is not a good place. It is not a place of joy. It is not a place of contentment. It is merely said that it is a place of joy with fatigue, of joy with pain on earth. So the old men went saying." And this captured my imagination, my curiosity, this notion of a place of joy with fatigue, a place of joy with pain. So I looked more carefully at various translations and at the Nahuatl. And I found that Lopez Austin translates in the Spanish text, "Se dice que solo hay alegría con cansancio, alegría con aflicción sobre la tierra." Or Ortiz de Montellano, the two translated the con there as mixed with, to read, "They say there is only joy mixed with weariness or mixed with pain." Francis Carton translates the first part of the word construction, siahui, as to obtain something through labor and fatigue, Molina as to acquire the necessities of life through work, James Longcard translates as to earn one's way through effort, to get tired, and Paco Aya derives from paki, meaning to be happy, to experience pleasure. So I propose this translation, something a little bit different. They say there is only attained through hardship and fatigue happiness, that it's all one hyphenated whole. And as I'll argue in what follows, it's not a matter of alternating these things, but it's a unified kind of happiness, attained through hardship and fatigue happiness. So this led me to a greater inquiry. So Siahwa Kapa Ko Aya conveys a specific kind of happiness, one obtained or earned through labor, exhaustion, and fatigue. It is a single, unified, unambiguous, or hybrid feeling attained through labor and fatigue happiness, which differs from happiness simpliciter. It is a hybrid feeling in the same way, at least some of us think about bittersweet. So the idea here is that it isn't ambiguous, it's sometimes happy, sometimes bitter, sometimes happy, sometimes exhausted. I alternate ambiguously or ambivalently. I think it's a particular feeling itself, attained through happy labor and fatigue happiness. So this then led me to this larger argument, the examination of hardship, since it seems to be, right, as the Ihiyohuiliztli says, an inevitable aspect of life on earth for human beings. I've got this set up pretty much with numbers. Being a philosopher, I like to organize things into premises and conclusions. Reciprocity, that is to say, maintaining well-balanced relationships of mutual gifting or offering and mutual obligating between persons, both human and other than human, figures prominently and centrally in Mexica ethics. Borrowing a phrase from Catherine Allen, whose book on contemporary Quechua speakers in the Andes I adore, reciprocity is like a pump at the heart of Mexica life. 2, human existence, both phylogenetically and ontogenetically, that is to say, both humans as a species and humans as individuals, always already takes place within a complex, all-inclusive, interwoven fabric of moral relationships with other persons, both human and other than human, and that obligate humans to reciprocate for gifts they have received. So, for example, we're born phylogenetically, right, owing the gods, quote unquote, for our existence. We're born ontogenetically, owing our mother and our father, grandmothers and grandfathers, our ancestors, for our existence. We're born into this web of indebtedness, not sin, but indebtedness. So we're in original indebtedness. We have been gifted into existence, and we're born with a gift, and the gift entails a duty or a responsibility to reciprocate. 3, reciprocal relationships of mutual gifting and obligating are constituted by masehwa defined actions, by which one merits or deserves that which one seeks from another person. So a little blurb on masehwa for those of you who don't know. Maintaining reciprocal relationships by means of masehwa involves teki, work, labor, effort. Masehwa gets translated this as to merit, to deserve, to be worthy of, to acquire that which is deserved. And tla masehwa is to deserve or merit something. Kelly MacDonald glosses masehwa as obtaining that which is desired through merit, of giving as part of the action of receiving. Masehwa is a purposeful activity undertaken by an agent who aims to bring about a desired event, process, activity, or arrangement. Masehwa involves teki, that is to say, labor, effort, work, which in turn involves expending vital life energy. One aims to transmit an effortful expenditure of vital energy as a gift or offering to another person in order to induce that agent to act in some way. It is by virtue of expending and transmitting vital life energy that one attains merit, becomes worthy, or comes to deserve the outcome one seeks. Indeed, the principal way by means of which persons interact in the social world of the fifth age of the Aztecs, and it's a social world in the sense that it consists of persons, not dead stuff, is by offering gifts to, accepting gifts from, and responding to gifts from other persons. Masehwa also aims at coaxing another person into becoming the sort of person who cooperates with oneself and achieving some end, and so into becoming a socially interrelated agent or relative. Here I pull on the work of a variety of people: Sandstrom's Roger Magazine, Parrot Pitru, Joe Campbell, and others. So the idea here is that in a social world, the way you get things done is by knowing how to get along with other people. It requires social know-how, as we might say. And in this social world, we go into this, pretty much everything is a person: digging sticks, cooking pots, houses, rivers, lakes, maize kernels, milpas. And the way you make things happen is by gifting them and getting them to cooperate so that one can achieve one's ends. So tekit refers broadly to all uses of human energy: physical, spiritual, intellectual, emotional, for realizing a specific goal or purpose, according to Ellen Good Eshelman. Tekit entails the expenditure of life force or vital power, in some instances tonali, but in a great many others, Ihiyohuiliztli, vital life energy or force. While contemporary Nahuas discuss tekit and gifting vital energy primarily in terms of Ihiyohuiliztli, our sources for the Mexica speak more commonly of tonali, yulia, and Ihiyohuiliztli. For present purposes, this matters not. Tonali, yulia, Ihiyohuiliztli, and Ihiyohuiliztli are all vital energies and aspects of teot. Why it doesn't matter is that it's the reciprocal transmission of life energy. That's what matters. For the purposes of brevity, therefore, I'll discuss Mexica ethics in terms of Ihiyohuiliztli. What is essential is that the continued processing and becoming of the fifth age and the lives of those inhabiting it depend essentially upon the Nepantla defined reciprocal exchange of vital energies. Nepantla being this process of mutuality or reciprocity. So, more on tekit. Tekit is an essential component of active reciprocity relationship, since it is by undertaking and successfully undergoing the hardship, and in the process expending one's life energy or Ihiyohuiliztli, that one initiates and maintains well-balanced reciprocity relations. It is by means of gifting one's Ihiyohuiliztli to another person that one merits what one seeks and obligates the recipient to behave as one wishes. And it is by means of the regifting her Ihiyohuiliztli that the recipient of the initial gift reciprocates and fulfills her obligation to the initial donor. In short, what is mutually exchanged is Ihiyohuiliztli, or vital life energy. In sum, by means of tekit, one not only fulfills one's moral obligation to reciprocate, but one also helps maintain well-balanced circulation of vital energy in one's family, human and other than human community, including cooking pots, digging sticks, fishing nets, maize kernels, rivers, sun, milpas, earth, and ultimately keeps energy flowing throughout the fifth age, the cosmos at large. Ihiyohuiliztli is a vital energy that animates, enlivens, and fortifies humans and other than humans. The life force that burgeons within animals and crops, causing them to grow, mature, and ripen. Power, strength, firmness, steadfastness, stability, and perseverance, its exertion, effort, striving, and courage, the mental, physical, emotional, spiritual strength to attain one's goals and surmount life's exigencies. One expends Ihiyohuiliztli in setting up altars, cutting paper figures, dancing, preparing foodstuffs, playing music, voicing prayers, chants, poems, and cuentos, sweeping, pilgrimages, fasting, nurturing, giving birth, giving advice, working your milpa, curing, and crying. All of these involve the expenditure of Ihiyohuiliztli and are a kind of tekit. One of the very nice things, sort of byproducts of this, is that those of you who know, there's one of the monthly festivals celebrated by the Aztecs called Atcahualo, or Waterlet, involves little children who are about to be offered to Tlaloc, or the Tlaloque, the little Tlalocs. And its Sahagun reports that the children's tears were greatly valued and they were encouraged to cry. And the typical explanation of why their tears were very important and valuable was that the children's tears exerted sympathetic magic upon the Tlaloques, who would then cry, I mean, not cry, but who would then drop rain. I personally find appeals to magic not very satisfying, because typically it means we don't understand what's going on. The appeal to Ihiyohuiliztli is very nice. Ellen Good Eshelman's work tipped me off to this is that the children's tears count as tekit, since they expend Ihiyohuiliztli, and so help the Mexica merit the desired outcome of the festival, which is rain. Okie dokie. So, tekit and the expenditure of Ihiyohuiliztli, or tonali, result in pain, suffering, exhaustion, hunger, thirst, and yes, even times death. So after I do all of this, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm enervating. Raising my children, that's exhausting. Teaching my classes, it's exhausting. Helping my neighbor in a barn raising bee or a quilting bee. All of these activities that we do towards other people involve the exertion of life energy and the transmission of life energy. And as a result of that, we're left exhausted, tired, hungry, thirsty. And lots of these, in the most dramatic cases, involve our giving of our lives. One of the dramatic cases would be, of course, Mexica warriors going off into the field of battle, either dying or bringing back with great effort, right? Captured warriors to be gifted to the sun or to the earth. So this activity involves tekit, and tekit involves the expenditure of life energy, and the expenditure of life energy is exhausting. So reciprocity, right, which is where we get back to, entails the exchange and transmission of Ihiyohuiliztli, which is accumulated through tekit, from donor to recipient and then back again. So when I gift you in order to merit some desired outcome, I'm gifting to you my life energy in some way or another. It can be by performing music to you, gifting to you food, helping your children, helping you in your yard work, in a variety of ways. I transmit energy, and that what happens in these relationships of reciprocity is the mutual exchange of Ihiyohuiliztli or tonali or some other form of vital life energy. Since all of this involves, since reciprocity involves tekit in the exchange of Ihiyohuiliztli, and the transmission of Ihiyohuiliztli involves hardship, it follows that reciprocity entails hardship. In order to engage in these relationships, it's hard, it's exhausting. My relationships with my children, with my wife, with my mother, all of these ideally are reciprocal relationships, and they're exhausting, they're tiresome. Therefore, to the extent that reciprocity figures centrally and prominently in Mexica ethics, and I think it does very much so, that is to say, figures prominently and centrally in the notions of doing the right thing, doing what one ought or one is obliged to do, Mexica ethics involves hardship. Hardship thus figures prominently and centrally in Mexica ethics. In short, living a morally upright life has to hurt. Moreover, humanness and moral goodness are isomorphically interrelated. One becomes and continues being truly or genuinely human to the degree one fulfills one's moral obligations to others and engages in and maintains reciprocal relationships with others. Therefore, becoming and remaining truly human requires acting morally. Therefore, becoming and remaining truly human involves undergoing hardship. Becoming truly human and living a truly human life has to hurt. Therefore, Mexica ethics does not aim to eliminate hardship from human existence and the good life. It aims to minimize disorderly, and disordering hardship, yet it also aims to minimize disorderly, and disordering pleasure, such as those which the imbalancing hardships and pleasures that typically result from misdeeds and ignorance of oneself and others. So the Mexica neither sought nor avoided pleasure and pain per se. Mexica ethics seeks to cultivate and arrange hardship and pleasure by weaving them together into a well-balanced life weaving in progress. So, would it be correct to say that hardship functions as a necessary evil, as Western theologian philosophers commonly say? I don't think so. Mexica ethics does not conceive hardship, pain, suffering, and even death as intrinsically bad. While some instances of hardship, pain, death are certainly bad, others are certainly good. It depends on the context. Nor does Mexica ethics conceive pleasure, relief, or happiness as intrinsically good. Pleasure, relief, respite, happiness that is neither merited nor reciprocated, for example, is imbalance inducing and hence bad. Instances of pleasure and happiness, like those of pain and suffering, must be placed in context before being evaluated. Mexica ethics does not accordingly define or evaluate the rightness or wrongness of actions, activities, states of affairs, and so on in terms of maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, the way utilitarians would, or in terms of satisfying strategies that proceed from the assumption that pain is intrinsically bad and pleasure intrinsically good. Indeed, a way of life governed by hedonic utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill, Jeremy Bentham, would bring about personal, social, environmental, and cosmic imbalance, resulting in the unraveling and destruction of the fifth age. So, back to our original word, Siao Capacoaya, neither Lopez Austin's, Dibble and Anderson's, nor Ortiz de Montellano and Montellano's translations as mixed with or with, I think adequately conveys this idea. Their translations lend themselves to thinking human life consists of or is inevitably punctuated by discrete moments of unqualified pleasure or happiness, occurring alongside distinct or discrete moments of unqualified suffering. The Huehuetlatole's claim is not the same as the common English language adages, one must take the crunchy with the smooth, or one must take the bitter with the sweet, since these two speak of discrete feelings or items, not a single, hybrid, unambiguous experience or feeling. Moreover, hardship and relief function as what I call, borrowing from the Nahuatl, enomic pairs. Enomic pairs are these things like male, female, light, dark, wet, dry, above, below, which are mutually entailing, mutually complementary, mutually arising, mutually interdependent, and also mutually antagonistic. So, the morally upright life, the good life, and the life worth having do not by definition, therefore, exclude hardship. Indeed, the very goal of living without hardship is not merely difficult, it's fundamentally ill-conceived. Just as the idea of life without death, male without female, light without dark, or dry without wet are fundamentally ill-conceived. So the idea here is that, right? I mean, if you think about the Christian notion of eternal life and there's no death, eternal pleasure or pleasantry in heaven with no hardship, with no pain, no suffering, that very notion, I submit, is fundamentally, it's logically or conceptually incoherent. Because life and death are polarities. They're mutually dependent, mutually arising. Life proceeds from death, and death proceeds from life. Without life, there would be no death, but without death, there would be no life. Same way with light and dark, dry and wet, and I think hardship and relief. They are interdependent, mutually arising. I'm only relieved to the extent that I'm enervated. I'm only enervated to the extent that I have been relieved. So imagining a world or a life without any hardship, it isn't just like, that's really hard on the slippery earth. It's an incoherent idea, logically incoherent. It doesn't make any sense the way we might think that a married bachelor doesn't make any sense, or 2 + 2 = 6 doesn't make any sense. It's conceptually incoherent. It's important to point out that the inconsistency of hardship is not seen as a punishment or consequence of any moral wrongdoing. It's not a consequence of any of original sin. It's not a matter of penance, making amends, or atonement, right? We're born into this web of original indebtedness. We have done nothing wrong. We've done nothing to accept it, but nevertheless, here we are. Lots of modern political theorists argue that in order to have a moral obligation or a responsibility, one has to choose to accept it, right? I only have the obligations or responsibilities that I accept. I don't have any which I don't consciously accept. For the Mexica, we're born with these obligations to regift, right? That's simply the way we're born. And in that respect, the Mexica are share this view, I think, with the native peoples of both North, Middle, and South America. Okie dokie. So hardship is both positive and creative. Hardship plays a creative, productive, and positive role in maintaining the continual becoming of the Mexica cosmos. This is borne out by lots of wisdom tellings. Tlamachili, I won't mess up the Nahuatl, I'm too nervous. We have examples. Legend of the Suns, Historia de los Mexicanos por sus pinturas. Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca explain the great Cayman to create the fifth age, earth and sky. Quetzalcoatl retrieving the bones of fourth age humans from Mictlan. Cihuacoatl grinding them into meal, and Quetzalcoatl bleeding himself upon them to engender fifth age humans. The so-called gods, right, offering their own lives to make the fifth sun. People, right, good comes from hardship in all three cases. And in all three cases, we have creation stories, so to speak, or wisdom tellings, the purpose of which is fundamentally normative. They tell people how they're supposed to act. And how they're supposed to act is that they bring about good things through undergoing hardship. And these are these are our role models. So, in conclusion, philosophers in both European and Asian moral ethical traditions like utilitarianism and I think Buddhism commonly predicate their theories of morality and the good life upon the assumption that hardship is intrinsically bad. The good life, the morally upright, and the life worth living for humans contain as little hardship as possible, and ideally none. By contrast, Mexica ethics denies hardship has intrinsic value and so denies it is intrinsically bad. Its badness or goodness are determined contextually. Furthermore, Mexica ethics maintains hardship plays an essential as well as a creative and positive role in morally upright human behavior and in the well-lived, good human life. In short, doing the right thing and being good, and for that matter, being a genuine human being, it has to hurt. And there I end. Thank you very much. Maybe I will stop screen sharing. Should I stop screen sharing? So maybe, well, thank you very much. I can't hear any of you. You're all muted.
Thank you, Jim.
Let's see if I can get myself on the gallery view so I can see people as they talk. So thank you very much. Hope I didn't read too quickly.
Perhaps the best way is to raise hands. I see Glenn has already done so, but to virtually raise your hand with the Zoom feature to ask your question. So, Glenn.
Hey, Professor Maffie. It's good to see you, and it's good to hear some of this stuff. I assume this is coming out of your new book. But I just wanted to maybe ask a comparison. So one of the problems that comes out of, for example, Stoicism or late Hellenistic ethics, whenever they're talking about pain just being something that you endure, because the Stoics don't think that pain is something that's intrinsically bad, one thing that often happens is that you run into this problem of apraxia, or not having a motivation to correct actions. This is in contrast to the Aristotelians. Pain is bad, injustice is bad, so you're kind of motivated to correct those injustices. Whereas with the Stoics, if it's all just about your reactions and tranquility and enduring, what motivation then do you have to correct injustice? What I'm seeing here in the Nahua ethics is really interesting, because pain and pleasure are kind of cached within this larger value of keeping things in balance. Is that correct? And that then seems it kind of combines multiple strengths of multiple views. This is in a comparative frame, obviously, where you can acknowledge that pain is a good part of life, but you don't get this sort of conservative status quo objection that therefore you should just endure whatever hardships come your way. There is a motivation to maintain a good balance of pleasure and pain, not just to endure pain. And there is a motivation to avoid unwarranted pleasures. So I don't know if that's a question, but maybe just more of a comment on how could you say more about this relationship between pleasure and pain, and how that relates to social motivations to reform our communities?
Wow, social motivations. Well, I take it, but I'll let you tell me the final answer. In contrast to both Stoics and Aristotle, there's more of a interrelational self. The self is defined in terms of the self's relationships, much as in Confucianism. I am teacher of, father of, son of, grandfather of, uncle of, neighbor of, and I'm pretty much exhausted by my relationships. Here, once again, I think the lots and lots of work been done recently by anthropologists. I don't think philosophers, by Catherine Allen, by an Andinist named Marisol de la Cadena, on this notion of, and I guess Nurit Burt David, sort of animism and an interrelational being is become quite the thing once again. And I think that's right. So, I mean, one of my motivations for eliminating injustice, however we cash that out, or pain in other parts, or unjustly, wrongly felt pain, is that we're all interdefined in terms of one another. So my discrete pleasures and pains are not actually solely mine, given how we're interwoven with one another. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. I can pipe up later. I'll leave time for other questions, but thank you for that.
Okay. I convinced you all.
I can ask a question while we wait for
Okay.
people to collect their thoughts. You you make the great point that it's not a matter of punishment or something that needs to be atoned for. But I wonder if you could speak to the confession to Tlazolteotl that is recounted. Is that sort of like a Spanish friar interjection or interpretation that's sort of being laid atop Aztec ideas, or how would this sort of confessional aspect of the filth-eating goddess fit into the ideas that you laid out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't thought too much about the confession, but I mean, as you know, by Mesoamerican, generally, Mexica lights. Actually, I mean, one of the ways in which you can transmit life energy is through speech, right? Speech is powerful. Living things make sound, living things make talk and speak. And when we communicate with one another, we transmit life energy between one another. That's grand, right? I mean, as you recall, right, the gods in the Popol Vuh create humans so that the humans can worship them. They go through various trials and errors, and they only get it when they create humans who can speak. And the way that the gods want to be worshipped and praised is through language. Secondarily, through incense and other things, but it's the spoken word. And in fact, they create the world through the spoken word. Lots of Mesoamerican creation stories, the spoken word. I mean, the world gets created through speech. And so speech is this powerful thing. Speech conveys energy. When I pray or worship, chant, sing poetry, I'm transmitting a particular kind of energy, life energy, to the gods. Right? So when I'm confessing, it seems to me, what I'm doing is maybe unloading a lot of my disordered energy onto Tlazolteotl, who consumes them. I mean, there is this notion, right? Gifting is also understood in terms of feeding and being fed. The feeding, being fed relationship is in another enomic relationship, like male, female, hot, cold, wet, dry. So, yeah. And I mean, this does work because getting back, to the Mexica and the Maya, one of the reasons why the gods in the Popol Vuh create human beings is that they're exhausted, they're enervated, they're hot with exhaustion, right? And what they need is somebody who's going to nourish them. And the way human beings nourish them is through the spoken word. Words transmit life energy, and words are nourishing. They feed you. So in this sense, I guess I am feeding Tlazolteotl some pretty nasty stuff, I guess. And she, thank goodness, is willing to consume it. That's a good point. I got to write that down.
That's a great response.
Confessions.
I'm convinced. Felipe.
Get volume up. Okay. Up. Okie doke.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Thank you.
So the passage of the Huehuetlatoli that you began with, that has that interesting compound of Siyawi and Paki, an allocative, are those? Do those words get combined very frequently? Siyawi and Paki. Do you have other examples of the combination of being exhausted and being happy, sort of in the Nahua's own words, or is this like an unicum, just a singular case in which exhaustion and happiness is?
I don't know. The fact that, I guess I'd have to do an extensive word search to a digital version of the Florentine Codex. Also go to Molina and see what other. I would also go and check out Joe Campbell's compendium. But yeah, I don't know for sure. I guess I would like to think not. I'm trying to think how often just plain pain and suffering without being mixed with happiness occur in various places. And it seems to be, at least in the Florentine Codex, most of the time those occur in the Huehuetlatoli. So I guess we should focus our search there. But you're worried I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here? One instance. Well,
yeah, a little bit. Yes, it's an interesting reflection, and it's it's very lyrical. But I would like to see sort of more moments of the Nahua thinking through these two terms, or if not juxtaposing them, then sort of more evidence for what you suggest, I guess.
Well, I think the rest of the evidence comes with the rest of the argument, right? I propose that translation, and then I show you why that interpretation or translation makes sense within the larger context of Mexica ethics, that it involves this sort of. I guess there are two things going on. One is the translation or that particular Huehuetlatoli, and then there's the rest of the argument. And if it turns out that, that passage from the Huehuetlatoli is merely this sort of molehill, I can abandon it quite easily and preserve the rest of my argument, right? Because the rest, and I can live with that. What's important, yeah, I can live with that. In a lot of ways, I can always just say that, that passage is sort of function heuristically to get me onto this idea. And it's, in fact, that everybody else, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But thanks, good. Yeah, I'll look around some more.
Thank you.
Sure, of course, my pleasure. Thank you.
I think Andrew Lopez was.
Thank you for the talk. It was great, really interesting. I'm just kind of curious about the question about justice. Kind of got me motivated here a bit. So this question is sort of part clarification and then part for you to say a little bit more about balance and justice. So one thought that I had was when you said, hardship is part of, the process of being human, right?
Uh-huh.
And kind of what I initially wondered is, well, what would sort of fix the idea of being human? But I remembered sort of the point you made about when we talk about humans, we both mean not just individuals, so the ontogenetic perspective, but also the phylogenetic perspective. We're members of a human lineage, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so if I know the framework well enough, I think if we can talk about human lineages, let's say we talked about the human lineage as a form of sort of spatial temporally extended organism, right? We can talk about sort of individual human beings being in balance. We can also talk about societies being in balance, and we can talk about, let's say, a species being in balance. If we can talk about a species being in balance or human society being in balance, it would seem that not everyone has to experience hardship for the larger organism to be in balance, right? And this seems like it would have consequences for sort of certain conceptions of justice, such that, well, some people can just continue to live without these hardships, that the hardship is sort of offloaded onto others, right?
There'll be free riders.
Sorry?
There will be free riders.
Yes, yeah. And so I wanted to invite you to speak more on that.
I guess theoretically, given the interrelatedness of everybody, free riders are going to end up pulling down other people. So, it seems to me that, there are going to be degrees of balancedness. It's not, either or. But if you want to maximize balance, you're going to want to make sure that everyone is individually balanced as well, because the only way their relationships are going to be balanced. And you cannot be balanced individually if you are not acting morally, and therefore undergoing some hardship. Right. I take it for the Mexica, it's much like, driving down the freeway. It works so long as everybody's doing it, but it only takes one person to mess up and you've got 100-car crack up, or one person not to wear their mask and you've got massive infection. I think they see the well-being of people as being essentially interrelated. Right. It's very sort of, medical, organic sort of notion. But like I say, I think, there are degrees of well-balancedness, and some people may try to game the system. And if you want to sort of speak cynically from the outside, the way people always like to do when it comes to the Aztecs, they never want to talk amicably, they always want to talk ethically, right? It appears as if you've got a ruling class who's pretty much living off the hard work of the peasantry, the commoners. But I don't know. You could say that about Aristotle and Plato. You could say it about Locke. Ethically, once you go etic, you can get cynical real fast. But
that's exactly what I was thinking. I wasn't necessarily thinking about like free riders, but I was thinking about the rich.
Yeah. Well, they're free riders, aren't they?
Yeah. Just I guess conceived a little bit differently than like I guess in Nozick or something. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly it looks like some people. Well, never mind. The way it will work theoretically is that everybody's doing their bit, and you've got us from each according to their ability to each according to their need. And the aristocracy, the royalty, just seem to have a lot more pleasures, it would seem, but I guess they also have more hardships, sort of this notion of noblesse oblige, right? But
they certainly emphasized their auto-sacrificial rituals,
Yeah,
like copious amounts of blood pouring
right.
out of their ears when they're offering it to sort
Yeah,
of at least make that case,
yeah.
right?
That's a good point, Andrew. I mean, you don't see it so much with the Aztecs as you do with the Maya, but some of the lintels, was it Lady K, who's like drawing a cord through her tongue? She's got cuts open her tongue and is drawing a twisted a rope, basically. I mean, that's some heavy doo doo, right? I mean,
Yeah, Ahuitzotl Tizak also sort of exaggeratedly pierce their ears on the dedication stone, and I mean, I would argue that you can make a case that
yeah,
the rich are at least giving a propagandistic view of, yeah, we suffer too, or we're also given a little back in our pain.
yeah. But once again, remember, we're going etic now. I mean, these sorts of, if I were to present you Plato's Republic, right, these criticisms would just be irrelevant because we'd be looking at the argument and the ideas and how it fits together. And there seems to be a disparity here. This comes up is that when you talk about actually non-Western peoples, but the Aztecs in particular, people quickly go to the cynical etic mode, like, well, that's a bunch of BS. Look what was really happening on. But when it comes to reading Marx or Locke or Bentham or Aristotle, Aquinas, Plato, it's like, yeah, so what if the Greeks did all that stuff? That isn't true of Aristotle. I mean, that isn't, Plato. And we divorce that, the two. So I'm trying to treat this as, a philosophical system here and see how it works. But I don't disagree with any of those etic observations.
And just to be clear, like I thought that your answer on emphasizing sort of the interrelatedness and kind of the precarity of like, well, if one person doesn't wear the mask or one person's not driving safely, it heavily endangers the whole thing. I think that's a really good answer. Actually, I appreciate it. I was having trouble thinking through it myself. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, think of your body, your notion of an organic whole. You ignore that cut in your foot gets infected, you're gone. You can be walking around going, hey, man, I'm a brain. I don't care about feet. They're little guys. And then that infection, blood poisoning, you're gone.
Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
Kian, I think you're next.
Thanks. I found this deeply, deeply fascinating. Thank you very much, Professor Maffie, for presenting this to us. I have a question that I guess is not unrelated to what Andrew was asking about. You can hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Good. Just making sure. I'm curious about the asymmetries that might result in these exchanges or transmissions of, I'm going to screw this up,
Ihiyohuiliztli?
Ihiyohuiliztli. Yeah. Ihiyohuiliztli. Thank you. Where something that might be a very small amount of hardship for one person might end up being a great amount of good for another one. I'm thinking, for instance, about like giving blood, right? Where if you donate blood, there's it's not comfortable, but it's over soon. It's a little bit, it's a little bit of a hardship, but it's not much. And yet the person who receives that blood, it could be literally life-saving. That seems to me to indicate a kind of asynchronous aspect of this life force exchange. But am I understanding that right? Could the amount of could like my gift or spending of like my energies be valued differently than someone else's, like the person who receives it,
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for one thing, I don't think there's any enforcement of what you might call formal equality here, right? Back to or what I said earlier, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, sort of thing. Think about the relationships within the family, right? There's, mom and dad, and especially your mom, right? She goes through pregnancy, childbirth. How can you ever repay her, right? It's totally asymmetrical. And yet, there you are, you're in kindergarten and first grade, and when mom's birthday comes along, you draw a little stick figure, a little heart, I love you, mom, Valentine's Day. That's a repayment. And that's returning life energy back to her. Does she expect you to like go through childbirth for her? No. But so I think there's this notion of, and it comes out in the family, and it comes out in the family a lot in Ellen Good Eshelman's work, that, you expect children to contribute, but not contribute as much as adults, right? That isn't appropriate. And it's going to be asymmetrical. I mean, eventually, I take it, they think that when children become adults and parents become elderly, then things may equal out a bit more. But the relationship between the gods and humans, radically, profoundly asymmetrical. But they're not asking for everything. They're just saying, hey, just, nourish us with your ritual speech. That's all we want. So some people think that this idea doesn't make sense because of the asymmetry. And I think they're sort of caught in this notion that all exchange has to be quantitatively or formally identical.
Yeah, and maybe I'm depending too much on a kind of Western understanding of debt to get this right.
Yeah, well, I mean,
so debts get repaid to an extent that they are owed, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be quantitatively identical. But I mean, I like your point about, giving blood, or maybe two different people give blood, but it takes no effort for me, but it takes a lot of effort for you. I mean, I take it that what you earn and what you merit is a function of how much life energy you put into the gift. So you don't put much in, you don't earn much back. You may be overwhelmingly grateful to me because I saved your life and all I did was go have my, vein poked. But I don't think you're morally obliged. Well, yeah, to do more than, yeah, there's some calculus there. I don't know exactly how the calculus is played out concretely. But yeah, that's good. These are good questions, good things to think about.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Ralph, I think you're next.
Well, thank you. Really very interesting talk. So I'm working with some others on related issues. This sounds to me like, I don't know if you even want to make this kind of a comparison, but I'm wondering if you might. Some sort of natural law tradition of some sort or another that must be observed, and just wondering how that might translate to actual law, everyday law, everyday kinds of things which are enforced through law. So that's one question. And then a second question, a bit more empirical. You had the notion that it crosses the Americas in some fashion or another. And I'm wondering if you have places or sites of evidence, perhaps in burials, perhaps in pottery, perhaps in other kinds of things, where one can see the manifestation of the sorts of relations that you're referring to.
Okay, first, natural law. I guess, I mean, there is this notion that morality is woven into the fabric of the cosmos.
Yes.
Right? Much as it was for Plato, maybe Aristotle. Right? That's just the way it is. Morality isn't a human convention, invention, artifice.
Mm-hmm.
By gifting us into existence, the gods introduce normativity and morality. So it's been a long time since I've read natural law theory. How does this play out in terms of civil law?
Yes.
Well, I take it that one's laws should somehow try to maintain balance, rectify imbalance, restore balance. And so, yeah, that's how I see that playing out. That balance is the aim here. Unfortunately, the example that comes quickest to mind is from Navajo notions of justice. And Navajo notions of justice is that justice is a matter of restoring balance. So, for example, if you kill a man, then you have to go take his place in his family and do his job. I take it that involves quite a bit of hardship on his part, and in an effort to sort of restore the balance. So let's see, your second question. Remind me the second one again.
Would be the sorts of empirical, perhaps,
Oh, right.
artifacts that might be across the Americas that might, begin to indicate this in some fashion or another.
Yeah, I don't know if there is any hard evidence. I mean, what's there can be interpreted in a variety of ways. If people are leaving gifts or things in burials. Most of this I'm getting from what passes as secondary sources. In the Andes, it's going to be Bernabe Cobo. It's going to be Guaman de Ayala. In the Mesoamerica, you've got Florentine Codex, Popol Vuh. You've got tons of contemporary ethnographies, which I think one can legitimately use by upstreaming. North America, there are lots of contemporary indigenous philosophers or theorists, theologians, whatever, who state just this sort of thing. People like Vine Deloria, George Tinker, Brian Burkhart, Thomas Norton Smith. If there's one thing that seems to me that's strikingly common around Americas, it's notions of life as a path, maintaining balance, and reciprocity.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically of maybe of the gifts and burial sites, if that becomes perhaps the best interpretation of why there would be artifacts in those burial sites.
I'm happy to see those, but I'm also willing to, obviously people can interpret those in a variety of different ways, but yeah, those could be seen as gifts. Lots of people, that works. Gifts to the ancestors, gifts to the dead, so that the dead who are actually still living help us through our lives. Lots of native Mesoamerican Nahuatl speaking in particular notions of Day of the Dead are all devoted to feeding ancestors, so ancestors will continue to help us live good, well-balanced life. And so on Day of the Dead, we feed them so that they feed us. It's a matter of reciprocity. But yeah, I'm happy. If you want to push that interpretation of burials, I'm happy to embrace it. I was just sort of hesitant because the open-endedness of those sorts of interpretations. But yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Great.
thank you.
Claudia.
Thank you so much for this talk. It's been really very thought-provoking. And I've got two sort of very different lines of questioning. So the first thing I've been thinking about is what happens at both ends of the spectrum of age with respect to these duties of obligation and suffering, right? And so I was just looking to try in book 6 of the Florentine Codex, thinking about the speeches to children, right? when they've been newly born, right? Where you talk about at least and whether inequality is baked in from the very beginning, right? What, and so I got through what you say to the child of the noble, right? And it's all about Ihiyohuiliztli and and Siawi and all of these sorts of things, right? I didn't get to the children of the commoners to see whether there's a greater or lesser burden of suffering upon them at that moment of birth, but coming back to these conversations about inequality that we'd had earlier. And then I was thinking about things like the idea that elders are able to drink to excess, but nobody else is, and it felt to me like all of this somehow enters into these questions about how much hardship and how much pleasure you should be enduring. So I wonder if that sparks anything.
I can't speak to the addresses given to the children of commoners. Let's see. As for the elderly, let's see. I'm trying to remember. I've got to remember and maybe you can help me. So pulque is going to be hot. Is pulque hot or is pulque cold?
I do not know off the top of my head. I'm
because
so sorry.
elders, as I recall, are extremely heated.
Okay.
They're very, very hot. They've accumulated a lot of tonali, or they've accumulated a lot of Ihiyohuiliztli.
Yeah.
And because of that, they kind of are able to, less for lack of a better, we'll just say, rest on their laurels, in terms like they've spent their whole life reciprocating, giving life energy to other people. They've accumulated a lot of credit, and now children and neighbors and other folks owe them back. So they can rest, they can lay back. They don't have to go work as hard as they did when they were 30 or 25. So that's how it plays out on the other end. That came to mind when you wondered about how it plays out at both ends of the age. So pulque, but I can't remember offhand if pulque must be refreshing, isn't it? And if that which is refreshing has to be cold.
Sure, why not?
I don't remember. But in any case, it might be that if it's cold and refreshing and nourishing, therefore it kind of tampers down them from being overly heated. But I'm really just kind of guessing, because I don't remember what the hot cold status of pulque is.
Okay, can I ask another unrelated question?
Oh, that's not right.
No? Okay.
Well, alcohol is hot. At least one contemporary now was. Alcohol is hot. That's why you drink a bunch of beer before you go to work. So you've got lots of heat to give off when you're working. So, I don't know. Good question.
Okay. So my next question, I was thinking about the example that you cite about Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca tearing apart the body of Tlaltecutli as a kind of meritorious labor. But I found myself thinking about, so whose Ihiyohuiliztli are we thinking about in that scenario, right? Because Tlaltecutli experiences this in one way that's very different from what Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca are experiencing.
Yeah.
So can you unpack, how the whole circulation is working in that scenario?
Well, in that one, she's obviously undergoing massive hardship, being ripped in two, and thus, as we know, she cries out continually for human bodies.
Right.
We eat the earth eats us. So she requires constant feeding, nourishing by us through ceremonies while we're alive, and then our bodies when we're dead. So I should have I should have included her.
Right, just because it feels like that's in parallel with these other with the other examples where Quetzalcoatl is letting blood and by blood and grinding the bones. It sounds like the labor is actually happening on his part, and it's true. I mean, I'm sure tearing her body apart was a terrible experience.
Yeah.
But it's actually quite asymmetrical who's doing what in that scenario.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Patricia?
Hi, thank you so much. This is incredibly, incredibly fascinating. And I actually had a question related to the Florentine Codex, Book 6, that we were just talking about. And it's reading it. There are a couple of, I'm not an expert, so excuse me for my, very simple question, but there are a couple of lines that are repeated that talk about, let's see, perhaps we shall obtain, perhaps we shall merit, perhaps we shall realize that of which we dream, and talking about merit and desert. And I interpreted that as meaning that you have no idea whether the gods or the lords are going to give back to you for all the work you're putting in. And so I was wondering how that fits in with ideas of reciprocity. Is that an accurate kind of way of describing that?
Well, I guess those can be quite, yeah, no, that's perfectly wonderful way of doing it. That can be, I mean, to be, well, at least two things going on. One is that the gods are mysterious. They're unknown to us ultimately. And we really are not sure what it is that we have to do to merit various things from them. That's why we need, ideally, the help of experts. But so, yeah, I mean, it's ultimately, the Mexica are willing to live with a great deal of mystery in their lives. I see them as sort of saying, look, at the ultimate questions about the universe cannot be answered. How we got, I mean, sort of the big cosmological, metaphysical questions that Western philosophers tend to obsess over, they simply go beyond or don't bother. I mean, in this way, they're like, I think you're like, a lot of East Asian, pre-Han East Asian, like Confucius. Confucius doesn't really worry that much about metaphysical speculation. It's all about how can we live? How can we live in balance? And I think the Mexica are like that as well. So there's that worry. Are we going to merit? Are we going to do the right thing? I mean, how can we know? But then there's also the second part is that even if there's always a worry that we're not going to pull off the ceremony or the gifting in the proper way. I guess partly due to the same mystery. How do I properly address you in order to get you to cooperate with me? What do I have to give to you in order for you to cooperate with me? All of those things are crapshoots to some extent. And I think that's what those passages are expressing.
Okay. Just while I have the floor, I want to say I've been teaching based on some of your internet stuff from Mexicolore and a couple of other sources and Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I'm a novice, but I've been working with undergraduates on a course called Intellectual Traditions, and we've been reading some of the Florentine Codex and working through these things. And I was really happy that what you said kind of went along with what we came up with in a really general way. But I wanted to say that the phrase at the beginning, when I saw that, I thought, that's it. So it worked for me as a heuristic after going through all of the things that are online. That really pulled it all together for me, the way that you put that word together. And then one other thing I want to say is that on one of those articles, when you were talking about economic duality, and you said, I don't include good and evil.
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh, we spent days on that. And I had to keep on telling them, I'm in Utah, I said, do not tell your state legislature that good and evil don't exist. Please don't tell them that. But I was trying to get them out of that category of thinking, and it was so difficult. But ultimately, the things that I found of yours were just fascinating and amazingly helpful, and I can't wait to see the book. So thank you very much.
I mean, there are good and bad actions. There's just not good as such and evil as such, right?
Exactly.
There are plenty of morality, moral standards. These folks, as you know, are not by a long shot are anything goes kind of people, right? You don't put musicians to death for playing out of tune or out of beat, right? And call yourself an anything goes kind of society.
Yeah. Well, the key.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I wonder if I could turn Patricia's question on its head and maybe ask if there's something in the other way around. If we don't know what we're going to do to deserve or to merit, or there's a capriciousness or an unknowability to the cosmos. Is there also something about like a prosperity gospel where those who are at the apex of society are understood to in some way have merited that position? And I'm thinking here about, say, jewels. Greenstone, jade is talked about in the Florentine Codex as like a noble stone, and therefore the property, the rightful property of the nobles, because both are noble, right? So I wonder, and I guess it also kind of gets back to this asymmetry that Kian and Andrew were raising earlier. You're muted, sorry.
Okay, now I'm better. I hit my desk and it muted. I don't think there's a gospel of prosperity. My understanding is the nobility are there because they possess more tonali than the commoners do. It's a matter of, how they're put together. We would call it blue blood as opposed to commoner blood, but they've got, according to, like, I guess it's Lopez Austin, they've got more tonali. And I take it that the sumptuary laws all have to do with what's appropriate for people who possess different levels of tonali. Here's a wild guess. My guess is that greenstone jade has a whole, it's very, very powerful. It's got a lot of life energy packed into it, and that it would, figuratively speaking, like fry or burn a commoner if they were to wear it. That it's not suitable for anybody who doesn't have a tonality commensurate with the tonality that the greenstone has. Right? And I think that's probably, but I don't know, I guess the same, maybe some of you know, right, the difference between cotton and maguey fiber and maguey, or cotton fiber and maguey, cotton cloth and maguey cloth might cash out the same way, that the cotton just has more tonality in it. It collects it more, and therefore it's more suitable clothing for those who are more possessive of tonality, the aristocracy. Well,
Jim,
thank you very much.
Thank you once again for a very interesting talk and for sharing it with us, and we'll look forward to the publication as well.
Well, good. Thank you very much for coming. Good questions. I had a good time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to meeting you all someday at an AP or somewhere. So, bye-bye. Thank you very much.